I have cultural baggage that I actually don't want. People say, oh, you must be proud of your culture. I'm like, which part? The part that did bad things to bad people? No, I'm sorry. My language, Afrikaans, was a language that was forced on people. That really gave rise to what we call the Soweto riots, which is around now, June 16th, was the big uprising in South Africa that really started to move towards getting rid of apartheid. And that was about language.
Hi, I'm Sharon Landon, and welcome to Old Asian Lady. Today my guest is Toby Openshaw. He is a documentary filmmaker based here in Taiwan. His works have been shown on Discovery, National Geographic, BBC, and so on. Toby, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you very much, and it's great to see you. It's been a while, and you don't look like an old lady to me at all.
It's the perception.
There you go.
Yeah, but thank you. I know you wear a lot of different hats, so what other work things can you add to your...
Well, so my day job is with Taipei American School. I'm the videographer for the school, so I record everything. I archive the music performances, the dance productions, the drama productions, do live streaming of sports and events, and do all the parent information, live streams or recordings, that kind of thing. But I'm also on the side, I do documentary projects. These days I work mostly with Taiwan's Indigenous people. So it's not necessarily always, this is a documentary film from beginning to end, but it's documenting events and things like that. And then more recently, especially during the COVID time, I've sort of started shifting more into a bit of an academic angle and sort of combining those things together and doing more academic work.
That's a lot of work. But you've been here for a long time. You've been here for 25 years.
28 years now.
Oh, 28 years
now.
Yeah,
last week was my
goodness.
Taiwan anniversary. Yeah, came here in 1999. Yeah.
Okay, and you're...
98, sorry.
1998. See what happens when we get older?
Yeah. No. Don't talk to me about it.
You're originally from South Africa, right?
Yeah.
For South Africa, a lot of people don't know about the apartheid. I think you were growing up during that period of time.
Absolutely, yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that, and has it influenced you in any way in terms of how you see and view the world?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it can't not, So, I grew up in the time when Nelson Mandela was still in prison. He was what they call a banned person, so you weren't allowed to quote him, they weren't allowed to publish photos of him, that kind of thing. And, I have to say that growing up as a kid, everybody around you tells you that this is the way the world is supposed to work. White people are better than black people, and we run the country, and blah, 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 So it really came as a kind of a shock to me when I was in high school, when I started really questioning this and saying, well, hey, hang on a second, this is not cool. And my parents and the minister at the church and the school teachers and everybody has been telling me this thing, which on the face of it is just not good, And so...
was there a particular incident that made you just think that, it was just a general questioning?
Now that you mention it, I do recall when I was young, I was, sort of middle school age, I think. We had a gardener who helped, like once a week or so, he would come and he'd help my dad in the garden. And now in those days, black South Africans had to carry a passbook. And their movements were restricted, so they weren't allowed to live and work in the white areas, And so that's apartheid, right? Keeping people apart.
Right.
And so the police showed up one day, and it turned out his passbook was expired. So he was there illegally. And even as a young kid, I was like, nah, this isn't right. Come on, And then my dad tried to talk to the police officer, who was very kind, but just doing my job, And then the police officer said to him, you know, sir, actually, because you employed him, you also did something illegal. But, you know, we're going to forget that now, but we're going to take him away. And I think even though the word didn't exist, or I didn't have the concept of it at that time, I understood the concept of white privilege at that moment, you know, and that really stayed with me. And so much so that by the time I was supposed to go and do my national service in South Africa, which we had to do 2 years, I was pretty certain that I didn't want to go up to the border and join the war and kill people. And I was very fortunate that I managed to get myself into the EOD school, the bomb disposal school. So I spent my 2 years there, and so I could justify to myself that I was saving people's lives, not taking them, kind of thing, you know. But immediately after I finished my military service, I went to university, got my degree, English literature and geography was my majors, and I left South Africa and I went to Namibia. So Namibia is just north of South Africa. At that time, it was still a part of South Africa. So it was almost like a province. So I could just go there. But they'd already done away with a lot of the sort of petty apartheid laws in Namibia. So I felt more comfortable there. And then Namibia became independent in the time that I was there. So I went through this whole independence euphoria and everything. It was amazing. But then afterwards, they said, all right, you know, you white guys from South Africa are not really welcome here anymore because we're running the country now, you know. So it was affirmative action, which you can totally understand,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Even though it affected me very strongly, but I went back to South Africa. And then in South Africa, Mandela was released, again, euphoria. Oh, this is amazing. We're going to be the rainbow nation, the reconciliation, all of that stuff. And then I was a cameraman for the South African Broadcasting Corporation at that time, working freelance. And I was a cameraman on some of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings in South Africa. So they basically said, we have to bring out the truth. Everybody has to come out. People who did bad things from both sides in the name of apartheid need to come forward and admit what they did, and talk to each other, and that there can be some form of reconciliation. And that really was an earth-shaking experience for me, sitting there, because as a kid, growing up, we always thought that, oh, these bad stories we hear about, the bad things the police are doing and things like that, is sort of just propaganda. It's enemy propaganda, you know. But to sit there in that hall with this police officer saying, yes, we hung him up by his toes and we lit the fire under his head, and just horrific things like that, just made you suddenly realize that, yeah, you can no longer pretend that it wasn't so bad, kind of thing, you know.
It just kind of reminds me of like the old South before in the States.
Absolutely, yeah. So that, you know, definitely shaped my worldview. And so when I came to Taiwan and I started working with Taiwan's indigenous people, I think that was one of the things that really connected me with the struggle that they are going through. Because I feel, as a South African, I have cultural baggage that I actually don't want. You know, people say, oh, you must be proud of your culture. I'm like, which part? You know, the part that did bad things to bad people? No, I'm sorry. You know, my language, Afrikaans, was a language that was forced on people. That really gave rise to what we call the Soweto riots, which is around now, June 16th, was the big uprising in South Africa that really started to move towards getting rid of apartheid. And that was about language. So sitting here with all of those things that I don't really want to be a part of, but then dealing with Taiwan's indigenous people, and indigenous people around the world have the same issues, the Maori in New Zealand, people in South America, everywhere. And these people are fighting so hard to recapture and get back what they lost. So I find that like really super inspiring. You know.
How did Taiwan first come onto your radar? I mean, why did you come here in the first place?
Right. So, you know, things were not going well in South Africa, and there was affirmative action there too, you know. The danger was that the place was going to like blow up because there was a very strong right-wing backlash. and crime was just shooting through the roof. And I had 2 young boys, and I really didn't want to bring them up like that. So friends of ours told us that they're going to come to Taiwan to teach English. And there were some of their South African friends already here who had invited them. And they told us how wonderful it's going to be and how much money they're going to earn. And we thought, we'll see you back here in 6 months' time, kind of thing, you know. And no, they came back a year later for a visit, and they said, it's all true. You must come, you know. And then they set it up for us. And that was in December they came, and in May of the next year I flew out. My wife and kids stayed behind for a couple of months until I got settled here. But I walked into a teaching English job here. And, you know, within 3 months, my wife was also here. We were earning 5 times what we were used to earning in South Africa. We paid off all our, you know, bad debts that had been dragging on for years in South Africa. And it was an amazingly liberating feeling, you know.
Your initial impression of Taiwan was that, oh, it's a great place to live. I can make a lot of money. I mean, what was that first impression?
Coming from South Africa with all the crime and everything, right? I mean, on average in Cape metropolitan area, there are 30 murders over a weekend. All right? So I came to Taiwan, and at that time, do you remember the egg tarts? They were super popular, these Portuguese egg tarts. Everybody was making egg tarts.
Yeah,
those little yellow egg tarts. And there was a store that had, there was a sort of a rival store between, you know, next to each other or whatever. And so this store sent over some thugs, and they went over to the other store, and they threw over some chairs, and they broke some glasses just to scare them. And the person behind the counter, when she ran away, she twisted her ankle. And this was front page news. There were conversations in the parliament, in the legislative yuan, about this wave of violence in Taiwan. And I looked at this and I said, I like it here. If this is the worst you can do, you know.
It's kind of like Taiwan and Hong Kong went through a period of the gangs and the Hei Se Hui and all of that stuff.
Even today, the gangs still exist, but the gang violence never really spills over into the public domain, you know. Whereas in Cape Town, where I lived, just every weekend, you just hear bah, 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 and you just know that gangs are having a shootout again, you know.
So then you're here, and your family came with you.
Yeah, so I had 2 boys at that time. Then my daughter Catherine was born here a few years later. And and she's now grown up with a baby. I'm a grandpa now, and she lives in Taiwan, and she's also teaching English here. And my son is also here. He graduated from NTNUA here. And he's teaching at an experimental school. You know,
you're talking about William?
William and Catherine, yeah. So my eldest son, Conrad, is mentally challenged. So for many years, we really struggled to get his visa residence status sorted out and so on. But eventually, when my wife and I separated, she went back to South Africa, and Conrad and Catherine went with her. And so Conrad is still living in South Africa now. I
do remember that Catherine came here not too many years ago.
Right, yeah.
But so being born here as a foreigner, does she have any extra benefits?
Yeah, so
for that?
Earlier times it wasn't so, but by the time she came back, she got a 2-year ARC with open work permit that could be renewed.
Okay, and that's just because she was born here. And even as a foreigner.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so there was definitely a benefit at that time.
Yeah, I remember kind of a few years ago that you were involved in dealing with the executive yuan. It's dealing with foreigners' rights.
Right. We were campaigning for the right of adult dependents to stay with their families in Taiwan.
Okay.
And legislator Jason Shu was engaged with that at the time. He told me afterwards they called it the Openshaw Amendment in the Parliament. You know, so there was some relief, but it's still not. The main problem now that people have is aging parents that they still can't get to come and stay here with them.
Okay, you're talking about people, foreigners or expats that live here, but
live
then
here
they
for a
have
long time, and their parents are getting old in South Africa or in the US or wherever, and there is just no path for them to bring them here permanently. You know.
So that's being worked on right now.
Hopefully, yes. Yeah.
And so I know too that Taiwan a few years ago opened up, I don't know if you consider it honorary citizenship, but citizenship for foreigners here in Taiwan.
Yeah.
Were you one of those people?
No. I've been told that I probably qualify, but I haven't really looked into it. But they, yeah, I mean, it's definitely, those kind of things are easing up. But there's still, for most people, it would mean they have to give up their home citizenship. You know.
Is Taiwan considered your forever home now, or you plan on going back to South Africa?
No, Taiwan is my home. I haven't been back to South Africa for 10 years now.
For 10 years?
Yeah.
Wow. Not...
So I have, I can see retirement sort of on the horizon. I have a cabin up in the mountain in one of the indigenous villages that I rent from one of my friends there. And so that's my retirement plan, is go and live in the mountains. You know, it's just beautiful view, fresh air, it's quiet. You wake up in the morning, it's just quiet. I love it.
Yeah. So then when you see yourself and your identity now, I mean, do you, I guess you can always see yourself as a South African, I guess, but is it Taiwan?
You know, that's really kind of faded for me, you know. So when people say, where are you from? Of course, I say I'm from South Africa. Although when Taiwanese ask me, and I always say, well, Taipeian, you know. I'm from Taipei, you know. But I can't say that I'm Taiwanese or that I even feel Taiwanese. Taiwan doesn't work like that. In Taiwan, if you have a white skin, you will always be the Waiguoran. My son, who speaks Mandarin, people say when he talks on the phone, they can't tell that he's a foreigner. He will never be a Taiwanese, you know. And that's okay. I've absolutely made peace with that, you know. But so I guess I've seen myself as a citizen of the world, a resident of Taiwan, and someone who tries as much as possible to contribute to the society in Taiwan, and I don't need to have a very clear label for what I am.
Yeah, everybody's a global citizen now.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? Yeah. So, what do you feel like has changed in Taiwan the most since you've been here for half a century? I mean, no, quarter of a century. We don't want
quarter of a century. Thank you. Yeah.
We don't want to make ourselves older than we have to.
Well, you know, when I came here, so 28 years ago, right? That was the 90s, end of the 90s. There were a couple of things that I noticed at that time that everybody talked about. Firstly was the buildings are all ugly, right? That was the era of buildings that had just bare concrete on the outside. Inside they were totally fine, but like really outside they were really ugly because there was a sort of temporary feel to it, right? People don't take care of their animals, right? I remember in Taoyuan, people had these small little wire cages outside their houses and their dog would be in that cage all day long. People don't use the open spaces. Kids only sit at home and play computer games. And kids only would study, and they have no social life. So, I mean, some of those, like the last mentioned, is probably still the case to a large degree, but all of those things have improved. And so now people are really into their pets, sometimes overly so, right? When you see these people walking with their pets in a little stroller and things like that. But you know, like Taoyuan, even the city that I started living in at first, now has beautiful open areas and parks, and those parks are full of people every weekend, and so on. So and then the education system here, I also feel there's a rethinking going on. There's a lot of inertia, but I mean, I've obviously, working for Taipei American School, I hear the more sort of high-level educational moves that are going on. But I do feel that there are more of these like experimental schools opening that allow for much more sort of freedom.
Creative freedom, yeah.
You know, my son works for this experimental school where everything is PBL, right? Project-based learning. And so those kids have it's great. They have this they just get a project and they have to learn all the skills and do all the research and so on to complete that. And I mean, that wouldn't have been a thing 30 years ago.
Why do you think that, because these experimental schools started coming in a few years ago, but they're really taken off. Why do you think that's so?
I think because Taiwan has just become more globally minded and more outward looking, and also like the demographics at Taipei American School already tells me that before it used to be all young kids who grew up in America and then came to Taiwan, and their parents came here maybe because of aging parents and so on. Now that has become like a wave, so now we see many more students who are actually born in Taiwan. And so that means that there is now a rising middle class of Taiwanese who actually grew up in the States or who lived in the States and worked there, maybe established their business there and so on. And so they're obviously bringing their ideas here for what they want for their kids. You know? Because I always used to say the education system or the system here was, kid goes to elementary school, has to get into the best elementary school, then he gets into the best middle school, then he has to work really hard to get into the best high school. And by that time his mother is saying, no girlfriends, high school. Then the kid gets into the high school and the mother says, no girlfriends, you have to get into the best university. Then they get into university and the mother says, no girlfriends, you have to graduate with the best in your class. And then the guy gets out of college, he goes to work, and 2 months later his mother says, why aren't you married yet?
That's so funny. Yeah, Asian culture in a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
So if you were to explain Taiwan to somebody who's never been here ever and doesn't know much about Taiwan, what do you think you would explain to them that they've just totally misunderstood about what Taiwan is?
You know, I mean, the way that Taiwan has become more visible on the world stage has actually been quite amazing. Way back in the day, I would do stuff for National Geographic, for instance, and they would say, don't say Taiwan. Don't say Taiwan and country at the same time. You can say, somewhere in the town of Kending on the island of Taiwan, there's been a shipwreck. I did this thing about a shipwreck, you know. But they literally don't push that kind of angle at all, you know. And now it's changed a lot. I did a thing recently for Australian TV about Taiwan democracy, and they broadcast it on the CCP's birthday, you know. So I think that people are already getting an idea. And so what I would say to people, you know, many people will say, okay, Taiwan is beautiful. Yeah, many countries in the world are beautiful. South Africa is beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, but yes, Taiwan is beautiful. So I think the most important thing is the people, that Taiwanese people as a whole, really, as with very few exceptions, you get a feeling for community spirit, for support, for helping each other, you know, carrying the load forward together. Western societies tend to be all individualistic and, oh, I'm the cowboy that rides off into the sunset kind of thing. And here it's just really totally different. And also the very real on the ground practice of democracy, of the principles of democracy. I have to say in the recent years, that has certainly become a bit more clouded. But I covered the sunflower occupation extensively, and that was one of the most amazing times in my life. It's just, and then again, comparing it to what I was saying earlier about the Truth and Reconciliation hearings, you know, the year was this ugly, violent revolution, and here was the soft power, beautiful, funny, humorous revolution, you know, and really comparing those two was
you
really
say it
interesting.
is humorous. I mean, because I wasn't here at the time, so I didn't know much about it. Because I only came here.
No, the sunflowers were fantastic about using humor to make jokes and to, you know, to diffuse tensions and so on, you know.
Was it like
So-
political satire? Type
yeah,
of thing?
yeah, that kind of thing. So, you know, there would be a toilet with a paper mache horse's head in it, right? Maing Joe horse,
Oh.
you know, so Ma is in the toilet, you know. And lots of people with signs like saying, I don't need to have sex, the government screws me every day. And you know, so no, there was a lot of that. And that's just beautiful when people can find the humor in something, and that, as I said, that disarms the opposition, right? Governments who are oppressive, when there are protests, they want the protest to become violent because they know how to deal with violence. But if it refuses to become violent, if it refuses to break things down, if it keeps the moral high ground and it keeps humor, then government's like, well, we don't know how to do about that.
Yeah, it's like the peaceful demonstration and things
so
like
it
that.
was absolutely a world example of what a peaceful demonstration could be like. The Occupy Wall Street movement tried to be something like that, but the government cracked down on it anyway. So I always say you have to remember in Taiwan, the Sunflower Movement was successful because the government allowed it to happen.
Right.
The government could have gone in and cracked down on it, but they allowed it to happen. The legislators were actually saying, hold on, by the principles of democracy, this space, the legislative union, the parliament building, belongs to the people. Police are not actually even allowed in here. And as representatives of the people, these students who are coming in here who have a valid argument have to be given this space. And they protected that space for them.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, usually Asian cultures, they're much more quiet, they're much more not speaking their truth and not being able to do that. But for it to happen in this way in Taiwan, it's...
But so I think that, firstly, I'm not sure that that's exactly true. You know, I think that Asian people, when pushed and prodded, can get riled up and speak out, right? But it's interesting though that you mentioned that, because yes, that is why the Sunflower Movement worked the way it did, because it was a collective voice.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff about people's different cultures.
Everybody came together and
aspects.
spoke as one.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't necessary for one person to like risk themselves, as it were. But it was amazing. You know, there would be like on that one Sunday, there were 500,000 people on the street out there, calm, peaceful. One moment, there was obviously somebody had some medical emergency, and an ambulance had to get through that packed street, like 3 lanes of packed street, people sitting in the street. And there was one kid with a little orange flashlight running ahead in this ambulance. Sorry, I choke up when I talk about this stuff. And he was running ahead, and the people would just open up like this. And the ambulance went, wee wah, wee wah, wee wah. And then just closed down again and all sat down again. Beautiful.
For me, when I see Taiwan here, and even if there's like an accident on the road or something like that, things are taken care of right away. If I'm in Hawaii, I just come. If there's an accident, it takes like 2 or 3 hours for everything to be cleared out. And I don't know what it is.
Everybody's
about
on their
Taiwan
phone,
that
and
does
everybody's there and helping, you know, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing to hear, you know, that little impression of what society or what it can be.
Yeah,
you know, when people work together.
Yeah, totally.
You've documented, you said the sunflower movement and a lot of things, but one of the most well-known work that you've done, I think internationally, probably is the work that you did on the betel nut girls.
Right.
What attracted you to this story or these people that made you want to, you know, talk about them?
Yeah, well, so when I came here, it was literally one of my very first impressions, driving from the airport to my friend's apartment in Taoyuan and going there on Daxingxi Road, past all the betel nut stalls, and I just saw these glass boxes with skimpily dressed women sitting inside, and I'm like, whoa, like, what is this, you know? And my friend says, no, they just sell betel nut. I'm like, betel nut? Okay, yeah, sure, it looks like she's just selling betel nut, right? And so as a documentarian, I'm always interested in unusual things, and especially coming from South Africa, that was like super unique and different. And then when I started asking more and finding out more, I also realized that people in Taiwan are very divided in their opinion about the betel nut girls. So they're the sort of the upper class people. Oh, they're bad girls, and they just have bad morals, and they cause traffic accidents. And whereas your sort of blue collar betel nut chewing guys like, yeah, great, yeah, that's Taiwan culture, and other people, no, it's not Taiwan culture, it's not our culture. And I'm like, well, they're out there, so it has to be part of your culture. I'm sorry, And so that's the other part that interested me as a documentarian, is how opinions are different. And it's always interesting to me is people who are misunderstood or misrepresented or underrepresented. So that, in those days I still had this idea, if I want to be a voice for the voiceless. Everybody's like, oh, those stores are run by gangsters, don't go there, don't even stop there, you'll get into trouble, blah, blah, blah. But eventually, more and more, I just know this is really interesting to me, and it's so widespread, And so I eventually got a friend of mine, a Taiwanese woman, to come along with me, and we stopped at one of the stores, where I had, in fact, stopped a few times already, sort of establishing myself, just buying a can of coffee. In those days, you bought this Mr. Brown.
Oh, they sell coffee
Mr.
there
Brown
too?
coffee. Yeah, so they sell drinks and cigarettes and all that stuff. And so by the time that I went there with someone, this girl had already knew me. Her name was Jane at the time. She's now known as Ada. So we started chatting and so on. And she was like very open to talk to. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so I asked permission, and I took photos of her outside her store and so on. And then she, introduced me to some of the other women and so on. And so it became a project. And it went on for more than 12 years that I was just regularly going out, taking photos, chit-chatting, seeing the way the business was sort of devolving and evolving. And I was on TV news. I had a photo exhibition. I put together a photo exhibition one time. It was kind of funny. Had the opening, and one TV station came to the opening. It was FTV, I believe. And that was on the Saturday night. And on the Sunday morning, when I got to my office, I was still working for Corel, the software company at that time, in Nehu. There was like 12 camera crews in the lobby waiting for me.
Whoa.
And my boss was like, what did you do? And so obviously they had seen the FTV,
foreigner.
Right.
What did he do?
They had seen the FTV news, and now they all decided they want to get part of this story. So I took the day off, and I drove them out to Taiwan and introduced them to some of the girls there who were like, wait, let me just finish doing my makeup, And and so then it was on TV for like 2 weeks solid. And 10 years after that, people would still, if I said something about betel nut, and they go, oh, you're the guy, you're the Waigoran who was showing us something about our culture, So over years it became, I was sort of advocating, for these women. Other people would contact me and say, oh, we want to do something about it. And then I would always be very careful about their bona fides and what is their interest really. I turned down Vice magazine, who wanted to do a thing here, and that just gave me like bad vibes.
Oh, yeah.
And then sure enough, they came and they ambushed the betel nut girl in her store, just came up with the camera already rolling.
Gosh.
And then when she saw them, she stopped, put her hand in front of the camera kind of thing, and they just drove off and talking about what a slag she is. It was terrible, it was absolutely terrible. So for me, it was just about showing these women for who they are, just young women who had, maybe didn't have all the economic choices that you and I had, but who are doing a job and doing it with as much fun as they can get out of it. I mean, many of them really enjoyed sitting there with skimpy clothing and sticky clothing. Absolutely, there was certainly an element of that. So it was really fascinating. But the business is in strong decline now, mostly because of health reasons. So the fact that betel nut gives you cancer has, finally become a strong enough deterrent so that people are not doing it so much.
Yeah, for those people in the audience that don't know what betel nut is, could you just really quickly?
Right, so betel nut is it's actually not a nut, it's the fruit of the areca palm tree. It's one of those tall palm trees.
Which are all over the place,
All over the
world,
place,
right?
yeah. But especially Southeast Asia. So in Papua New Guinea and Malaysia, there's an island called Penang in Malaysia, which means betel nut. Right? Yeah, it's betel nut island. So Penang, Binlang is all the same thing. Yeah.
Oh.
And so the areca nut has an active ingredient called arecoline. And so what they do in all the places where they chew it, they wrap it in a leaf, usually from the pepper palm, and they put a little wipe of calcium powder on it, and that activates the active ingredient. So it gives you a bit of a rush. It's like drinking like 2 cups of espresso, one right after each other, kind of thing, yeah. So it gives you energy, so that's why it became the sort of blue-collar thing of long-distance truck drivers and taxi drivers chewing betel nut to keep awake. And then because of that, the idea came, as it could only in Taiwan, to put glass boxes by the side of their exits to the freeways with girls in sexy clothes selling
with
betel
those
nut.
little flashing lights.
Yeah, with the little flashing lights. When I came here, it was all still real neon lights, right?
Oh.
Now it's all LED. So I went through that whole sequence and so on. But yeah, it's really died down now. So I feel that my photographs is a document of a passing and a fading cultural phenomenon.
So what would you say that the betel nut girls taught you, if they taught you anything, whether it's about yourself or whether it's about Taiwan society as a whole?
Yeah, so I mean about Taiwan society for sure, the fact that they can sit there unmolested is a major thing from the beginning for me, because in South Africa, a girl like that will be raped within the hour. Absolutely. There's no way. And the girls told me that sometimes they get men who come up to them and like expose themselves or make some sort of lewd remarks and so on. But those girls just ignore the guy and he will just leave. Again, in a more violent society, he will now get out of the car and actually come and harass her. But I also found that most of them are actually pretty well protected. The boss is usually somewhere in the back. I have photos of stalls where there's a baseball bat in the corner. And so if somebody was to really molest a betel nut girl, they will definitely find themselves in trouble very quickly, So yeah, so that part, certainly what I taught. And then about myself, well, I had people saying, oh, you're just an old pervert trying to take photos of pretty girls, And I always said, well, some people suggested I should say yes, and so. But, I always thought, well, I could really go a lot worse if I was really looking for sexy women kind of thing. So, no, it was really always for me about trying to find that real human being behind the pretty picture of the girl sitting in a booth kind of thing. I always told people when I have my photo exhibitions, I say, come and stand here and just take it in. Because when you're driving, you always just zip past, right? Oh, there's a betel nut girl. But come and stand here and look, and she's sitting there on her phone, and it's like 2 a.m. in the morning, and you sort of the loneliness of the betel nut girl and that kind of thing, And with Ada, whom I then still maintain contact with, she now does makeup and hair for brides and so on, and she's doing very well for herself.
So these are actually for people that, because you mentioned that there were a lot of people that look down on them, but in fact that there is it just a temporary thing for certain people?
Yeah, so some of them manage to get out of that cycle for sure.
Yeah.
Some move from there to like the gambling places where they not escorts, but hostesses for the men who gamble, and so they light their cigarettes for them and that kind of thing. Right. And they say, oh, it's better because it's indoors, right. And it's not so cold and not so hot. But I know several Betel Nut girls who married, the guy in the BMW that used to stop regularly. And so many of them got themselves out of that business. But Ada was interesting because when I met her the first time, she was just turned 18. So she was definitely working illegally for some time. And she had dropped out of high school. But then during the time that I knew her, during that 12 years, she went to night school, finished her high school. Then she went to university, also part-time, and got an accounting degree, got an accounting job in a company, hated it, and came back to the business. And then she managed 2 Betel Nut stalls by herself. So that was another thing that was interesting, is how, you would look at these women from a feminist point of view and say, oh, they are there for to be eye candy for men, blah, blah, blah. But then when you talk to the women themselves, there is certainly an element of empowerment there. They control the interaction they decide how long it's going to be, how long they're going to entertain this guy before they tell him to move on, that kind of thing. And so it made me more aware than I already was that things have layers, and nothing is just black and white.
Yeah.
That's really the most important part.
I always wondered, how much money they can make, because these little things that they sell are not that expensive. So is it that they sell it en masse, or do they get tips, or how do they make a living?
So the conventional wisdom was that a Betel Nut girl on average could earn more than her sister who had gone to university and became a school teacher.
Right.
So an entry-level school teacher job, they would actually earn more. Not a whole lot of tipping going on, but some, yes. But no, if they were popular and they wore nice clothes and they, it's a whole skill, right?
Yeah.
And I filmed a girl going through the training as well, which was really interesting. It's like you have to sit back straight with your leg like this so that oncoming traffic can see your leg, that kind of thing. And so the girl who was doing the training said at the end of the day her back was really sore from having to sit up straight like that all the time.
Interesting.
So yeah, they turned it into a science almost. But so no, it's just that it's 50 NT a pack. And the number of nuts vary depending on the quality and the size. And so they managed to make over 25,000 NT a month, which for them, for a girl with no high school degree even, was not bad money.
Yeah, wow. So these stories about the Betel Nut girls, and you mentioned that you like to tell stories or about people.
Yeah.
From there, you mentioned also about the Indigenous.
Yeah.
What did you do, and why did you want to work with Indigenous people here?
Well, so I was in Taiwan for a while before I actually even knew that there were Indigenous people here,
Yeah.
Look, honestly, my impression of Taiwan coming here was what I had from the Lonely Planet guide, and on the cover it was a rice paddy in a temple, so that's kind of what I expected of Taiwan. And so there were a lot of things that I kind of really had to adjust to. And so then I found out, there are Indigenous people here. And so in Namibia, I had worked with the Topnar people. There's a small group of Indigenous people there, and what is called the San or Khoi people, commonly known as the Bushmen. So those are the people, if you ever see the movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy. So they're living in the desert. Living in the desert. Hey, when I came into Taiwan, the first day I went down to the VHS video store that had a copy of The Gods Must Be Crazy there. Right. But so short-statured, brown, yellow skin people in the desert with bows and arrows, that kind of thing. So I worked with some of those communities in Namibia, so I already had some idea about what these people deal with, and then when I came here and I heard, wow, it's actually a really similar story. It's like these people owned the land, fought with each other, of course, let's not sugarcoat that part too much, but there was no land ownership as such, but they had their hunting grounds and their water supply and everything. And then a colonizer comes in and just puts all of that completely in disarray, forces them to learn the colonizer's language, takes away their land, takes away their culture, forces them to dress the way the colonizer wants them to dress, all of that stuff. And I'm like, wow, it's just exactly the same as what happened elsewhere, you know. And so that was my first interest, is just the fact that why is it that it's such a universal story around the world, and what are people doing about it, you know. And at that time I also I got connected with Maori people in New Zealand, and I began to see that they are at least 20, 25 years ahead of the curve already at that time already, in terms of having their own television station, of reinstating the language, all of that kind of stuff. And again, as I say, from South Africa, the Dutch came to South Africa, then the British came and took over and forced English on the Dutch people. Then the Dutch people became ascendant and forced their language on the black people, and the black people took that away from, you know. So this is a very familiar story.
Yeah, I come from Hawaii, and of course there's Hawaiians too that are Polynesians that are going through the thing where they want to have some sort of a self-government at this point. They haven't been successful at it yet, but there's movement, I feel like, in a lot of different countries in recognizing more about the indigenous people.
Hawaii has a really a long struggle already, but they're always kind of being thwarted by this, oh, you're part of America kind of thing. I'm told that there's only like 1,000 native Hawaiian speakers left.
Yeah.
You know.
One of my friends that actually interviewed on the show before, he is part Hawaiian, and I think there's a trend to try to start getting the language started, getting more people to be able to remember.
Because the language is the carrier of the culture, you know, and so if you can revive the language, and so now in Taiwan there are major language revival projects going all over the place.
You've recently written a book about a particular group of indigenous.
Right. So
tell us about
when was 2011? 15 years ago now. My friend Sharon took me up to the village of Qingchuan, which is up in Ufeng, near in the Hsinchu County. And he is married to a Saishat woman. So Saishat is one of the 16 recognized groups in Taiwan. Pretty small group, only about 7,000 people, of which about 1,000 are speakers of the language still. But, you know, compared to the number, that's actually not too bad.
Yeah.
And so they have every 2 years they have a ritual, a ceremony called the Koko'ta'ay. And so Sharon invited me to join this ritual. And the ritual is about, these Saishat people say that many, many years, long time ago, they met a group of short, dark-skinned, curly-haired, mischievous little people in Taiwan.
What it sounds like to me?
Menehune.
In Hawaii, they have menehune.
Menehune, exactly. Exactly.
Okay,
So, exactly, this is an amazing story, and I've kind of heard this before, elsewhere. So what is this now, you know? So I was immediately intrigued. So I started asking, you know, archaeologists, anthropologists, all these people, where did this myth come from? Where did this thing originate? It must have originated from somewhere, because it is such a strong, central part of Saishat culture. And everybody's like, it's just a myth. Myths happen. People make up stuff, you know? I'm like, yeah, people make up stuff. But if you look at the stories in the Western world about dragons, and you think, oh, maybe they saw a fossil of a dinosaur somewhere and that looked like a dragon to them. So there must be a little something that sparked it, you know, that spark, you know. But they all just said, no, nothing like that. And so then over the years, so I would go to the Koko'ta'ay every year. Very briefly, what the Koko'ta'ay really is about. It commemorates an event. I'm just repeating it from the Saishat elders. The Saishat came up into the mountains and they were basically forced in there. There's a forced migration into the mountains, and they were having a hard time. They struggled to. They were used to planting rice on the fields on the plains and things like that, and then they met these little people, and they called them the Da'ai, all right? Or some people said Koko'ta'ay. They called them the Da'ai, and the Da'ai were funny and magical and mischievous. They played tricks on them all the time and things like that, but they helped them. And they showed them how to plant millet in the mountains, how to plant the dry rice, how to hunt, trap the boar, that kind of thing. And so they had a very good relationship going on there for quite some time, and whenever the Saishat had a festival or a ceremony or something, they would call the Da'ai over and they would come and join them. And so, but over time, because the Da'ai was kind of dying out, and also because of their mischievous nature, they started getting fresh with the Saishat women. And so resentment started to build up there, right? And then one day, they had a big party going on with the Da'ai with them and everything. And the one young man from the village decided to do something about this. And he went down. So at the river, the Da'ai used to live in a cave across the river. And they would come across, and there was like a tree, a big loquat tree, they say, that stuck out like that they used sort of as a bridge to sort of rest on and so on. So he partially cut through this bridge and then just covered it up with mud so it's not visible. And so his plan was that on that night when all the little people had gone back home, he was going to cut through the rest of that tree and tell them, don't come back. But as it happened, a big fight broke out, and all the Da'ai went at the same time. So when they got onto that tree, it broke and it crashed down into the river, and they were all killed. Except for the shaman, who was on the other side and who stayed behind and who called down a curse on the Saishat people when he saw what had happened. So the guy who had cut the tree felt really bad about what he had done. It was not his intention. And so he thought of a way that he could like atone for what he had done. And the little people used to sing a song that went on and on and on and on as they worked in the fields and as they walked in the mountains. And it was all about how to live your life and how to respect nature and all of that stuff. So he learned that whole song. And a year later, he met up with a shaman and he said, here, I've learned this song, and this is what I bring to you to say I'm sorry. And the shaman said, great, good, I accept that, but you have to go back to your people and tell them that once a year they have to come together and they have to perform this song as a ritual. They have to do this every year to say sorry. And the Saishat did that. So during the time of the Japanese wanted to put a stop to this because they were blocking all the indigenous culture stuff. But a Japanese researcher went up to the mountain there with an interpreter. They told him the whole story. He wrote it down, and I've actually got not the original, but a copy of the Japanese document from 1906.
Wow.
And he went back down to his superiors and he said, these people believe really, really bad things will happen if you stop this thing. And to their credit, they actually listened to him. So there was some negotiation, and eventually they decided they'll do it every 2 years, because every year it's a big thing. They have to bring everybody together and so on. And so since then, it's been happening every 2 years.
Wow.
In 1936, an ethnographer from the Taihoku University, which today is National Taiwan University's ethnography department, went up there with a 60mm Bolex camera, and he filmed the whole ceremony. That footage was kind of lost, and around 2002 or so, they found it again. They cleaned it up and they digitized it, and then they went up there to the mountain. They put up a big screen and they screened it for the people. And they say it was the most amazing thing. Is people were like, "Oh, there's my grandpa when he was a little boy," you know. And then they also noticed, or they mentioned, how even though that ceremony is carried over only by oral tradition, they've actually managed to keep it absolutely, it's still the same as they did it back then, you know. So yeah, so now, you know, they're doing this thing. I go there every 2 years and sort of just observe and film and participate in this amazing ceremony for 3 nights. These people are dancing, chanting in a circle, and basically as a way to say sorry to the little people. And that's how unique is that, you know?
Yeah, I know.
Again, coming from South Africa, Truth and Reconciliation, what a painful process this was. And basically these people are doing it every year, you know?
Yeah.
And so anyway, just continuing about the story about the little people though. So in this interim period, I also learned that in the Philippines, there are people who are short-statured. Now, they're not this big, but they are short-statured, dark-skinned and curly-haired. Very similar description to the Da'ai. They're called Negritos. That is still the current name, the Ata people. And so I was like, okay, were there ever Negrito people in Taiwan? And again, the answer was, we have no evidence. We don't know. But 4 years ago now, Professor Hong from an Australian university, she's Taiwanese, but she's in Australia, was working on a project with various skulls from around the region, which they were reconstructing and then measuring, doing craniometric measurements. And a skull that had been sitting in storage at the NTU Museum for like 30 years at that time was reconstructed and analyzed. And in her paper, she wrote one little chapter saying, this appears to be a Negrito person, and this would tie in with the many stories in Taiwan about little black people. Just one paragraph like that, right? And my friend Michael Turton, whom you must have heard of, spotted this and he flagged it for me. And I was like,
on it.
I emailed her, we had a Zoom call, we talked, and I was like, we have to write the paper about this. So 2 months later, she wrote the paper and didn't mention my name, but it's okay, I'm not bitter. And and so she expanded that and she wrote a paper about it. And I was like, I got to get my stake in the sand here right now. So I went back to all those people that I'd been bugging about this all these years. And I said, write me a chapter of the current state of knowledge about Negrito people, about the little people myths across the Pacific, the Menuhune. In Solomon Islands, we have the Kakomora. Did you see the movie Moana?
Yes.
Right? You remember the little coconut men?
Yeah.
That's the Kakamoro. That's the little people of the Solomon Islands.
Wow.
So Disney actually really did their homework, because the story in the Solomon Islands are these little people and they wear coconuts for armor. So Disney just made them like little coconuts kind of thing, you know. And so, and I'm very fortunate. So in the interim, because of the work I'd been doing, I was offered a fellowship at University of Lancashire at their Department of Austronesian Studies.
Oh, okay.
All right, so I'm a affiliated research fellow. And so the professor there, Professor Nikke Alsford, is also the series editor for Brill, which is a European academic publisher, for their Taiwan Studies series. And so he basically facilitated for me to then publish the book through Brill. So we got all these chapters in, it's 13 chapters, and really just saying, this is the current state, what we know, and positing, I mean, we're not saying that that is the origin, but positing that in early Austronesians on Taiwan interacting with Negrito people on Taiwan could be the little kernel for where the story about little black people started from.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel that there are so many things that we don't know about in this world, you know, as in people's cultures, different things. You know, now there's been stuff coming out about ET things, you know, a lot of that kind of stuff coming out, and to discount that things like this are possible, and that these little kernels of information come from somewhere. I think people should be open-minded and broad-minded to be able to accept that possibilities exist. What is the name of your book?
All right, so the book is called Seeking the Koko'ta'ay, and but if you Google Brill, Toby Openshaw, you know, it will come up.
You'll find it.
And then I also, in the last year, finished a short documentary film on the same topic, just to sort of as a companion to the book, which is on Taiwan Plus. So you
Okay.
can, again, if you search Taiwan plus Toby Openshaw, you'll find it.
Yeah, I'll provide some links and things
Okay,
in the
cool.
description. But as a filmmaker, you're talking about all these stories that you tell. What do you feel is the most important thing about telling people's stories from behind the camera?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, when at first I was like, oh, I'm a voice for the voiceless. But when working with Indigenous people, I soon began to realize that don't come in there with your white savior ideas. It's not your stories to tell, and actually these people are totally capable of telling their own stories. And so I've certainly in the past year or so become much more conscious of, like with the Koko'ta'ay documentary, is that there's very little editorializing on the Indigenous issues. That I use those people's voices. It's the elders speaking, and it's what they are saying. Half of the documentary, or part of the documentary, is my part about the book and about finding out about the skull and that kind of thing. So I'm confident in telling that part as my own story. But I do still believe, and the Sajat people say, yes, we want people to know about this. We want this to be out there in the world. And so I can do that. But where I am now, at my age, now I'm beginning to pass on to the next generation. So my friend Sharon, I mentioned, his daughter, so she's half Indigenous. She's really taking on her Indigenous identity now, and I'm helping her in any way I can to, okay, right, you take the torch now, you take your space at the table, you take the path, and you tell your own stories, and how can I help you?
You did mention about at your age now, neither one of us are getting any younger.
Right.
But is doing what you're doing now, things that telling people stories. What are you going to do after you retire?
No, look,
besides going up in the mountains and
right. So no, documentary filmmaking is a thing that people tend to do until late in life, until nobody wants to hear their stories anymore. But I did now, after I finished that film, I took a bit of a break, and that was nice. Because I sort of thinking back, in all my years in Taiwan, I've always had 2 or 3 projects on the go. There's always something going. This weekend I'm going up to the mountain. Next weekend I'm going down to Pingdong, whatever, So I've stepped back a little bit from that, and it feels great. But I do have another project on the go, that's rising up now. So I will continue to do this for as long as I can, and for long as I'm asked to.
So this new project that you're talking about, can you give us a little hint, or is it kind of top secret?
No, it's not top secret, but so it's essentially it's a friend who went to Ukraine. Okay. And recorded a lot of interviews there with people. Wow, and so now it's just an editing job. Now it's going through all of that and finding the storyline, finding the peaks and the valleys, and structuring it into a story. So that's maybe what I get onto next.
Over the 25 years that you've been here, what do you feel like you've contributed to Taiwan? What is your legacy that you hope that people can get from what you've been doing here?
So I think firstly, in terms of like the Betel Nut Girls, I think I played a part. Obviously, I can't take all the credit, but I played a part in demystifying the whole Betel Nut thing. As I said, when I started, it was like, ooh, don't even talk about it, that kind of thing. Whereas by the end of that period, it was just, everybody was kind of just accepting, like, these are just normal human beings, sort of thing. To the extent that I wanted to do a book at some point, I just suddenly felt that there's not that much interest anymore, because it's now become kind of commonplace, and maybe I was doing my job too well, So I would like to think that that's part of it. The projects I did for various outlets, Al Jazeera, whatever, it was all about putting Taiwan in a positive light, and it was part of that Taiwan soft power kind of thing that we all try for. So I would hope that would be that was also a contribution, Yeah, I think that would be sort of the main thing is putting out Taiwan's name in a positive way is something that I've done all the time since I've been here. I was the chairman for the Red Room Association for a while, and of course, that was run by several people, but that fulfilled a very useful function in Taiwan at some point, in Taipei specifically, I should say, mostly for foreigners who wanted a community and a platform, and a safe space.
Right, and so it was related.
Yes, so art and culture and public speaking or storytelling, music, all of those kind of things lived around there. And those few years that it was really cooking, which you also know about, that felt really good,
So I think people are just amazing. Their stories, the different things that they've gone through, and the experience that they've lived, yours, your life, my life. And I love telling stories. This podcast, I hope this podcast is able to share with people. Their stories deserve to be heard.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah. So look, this has always been my experience with both with the Betel Nut Girls and with Indigenous people also. So like the Betel Nut Girls, I had Taiwanese photographers say, "Oh, can I go with you sometime?" Because the girls all refuse me, And I always just said, "I can." If you go there with an open heart and a real desire to hear somebody's story, they tend to open up to you,
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really important. And so I hope that one day we can switch seats here, and then I will interview you for this podcast.
One of these days.
And you can tell me all your stories.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. So then we get to this part of my podcast, which is called Your Wow, which means your words of wisdom. So do you have any words of wisdoms that you would like to share with the audience based on your experiences? Yeah.
So, people often ask me like, wow, where do you get all the energy from? Because like I said, you always have something on the go, I have a quote supposedly by Albert Schweitzer that says, "A man can only do what a man can do. But if he does it, he can sleep at night and he can do it again the next day." So that's always been, I can't change the whole world in one go, but I can make it a little bit better every day.
Yeah.
And if I do that, then I can be peaceful in myself and I can sleep, and the next morning I will have energy to do it again.
See, I love that. You can make the world a little bit better every day.
Yeah.
I wish everybody would
just
subscribe to that.
That's all you need,
Okay, thank you, Toby, for sharing some of your story with us. I learned a lot today.
Thank you. It's absolutely my pleasure. I love to tell my stories, as you can tell, I'm sure.
And thank you for joining us on Old Asian Lady.
And Old White Guy.
And if you enjoyed listening to our stories, please like, subscribe, and share. We really appreciate it. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.